written collection was necessary to supplement its preservation and memory. The report quoted above proves several points. Firstly, it shows that the whole of Al-Quran was safe in the memories of the reciters who had learned it in the lifetime of the Holy Prophet. There was nothing to be feared so long as the reciters were safe. But if they perished in battles, then it was feared certain portions of the Holy Quran might be lost because the manuscripts of different chapters and verses had not been, up to that time, collected in one place. Secondly, it appears from it that the collections of Al-Quran undertaken in the time of Abu Bakr was meant only to supplement its preservation and memory. The apprehensions in the mind of Umar arose because he feared that as many reciters had perished in the Battle of Yamama, many others who might be lost in some other battle. Memory was a good repository, no doubt, but such a collection could at any time be entirely lost by those who retained the Holy Book in memory. Thirdly, the report proves that up to the time when Abu Bakr took in hand the collection of the written Quran, no portion of it had been lost, and that there were still many reciters who had it safe in their memories. To sum up, the report shows that the entire Quran was safe in the memories of the reciters, and that Umar only desired to make a collection of Al-Quran in writing in addition to the collection existing in the memories of the reciters. Well, it might also indicate that it's just he didn't have, per se, access. To a full copy himself. We have now to explain what was meant by Abu Bakr when he said that he could not do a thing which had not been done by the Holy Prophet. Umar's question related not to the mere collection of Al-Quran, but to the collection of the Quran in writing. The complete Quran, with perfect arrangement of its chapters and verses, existed in the safest of repositories, the memories of men. But the different writings, containing different portions of Al-Quran, had never been collected together and arranged. Umar asked Abu Bakr to collect these writings, and this was what the Holy Prophet had not done, and therefore, in the first instance, Abu Bakr refused to do it. But Umar's case was based on strong and sound reasoning. The Prophet himself had done both works. He had every portion revealed to him, reduced to writing, and committed to memory. Abu Bakr was thus convinced of the truth and of his ability, what Umar said. Original manuscripts made in the Prophet's presence were be collected. Another point to be elucidated in the report quoted above is the statement of Zaid as to the great difficulty which he thought he was likely to experience in the performance of the task with which he was entrusted. Indeed, he thought that it would not have been more difficult for him if he had been asked to remove a mountain. What were his difficulties? A report narrated by Ibn Abi Dawood makes it clear. Umar rose and declared that whoever had received anything directly from the Holy Prophet should bring it to Zayd, and they, i.e., the companions, used to write it upon the papers and tablets and palm stems in the lifetime of the Holy Prophet, and nothing was accepted from anybody until 2 witnesses bore testimony. FB, Volume 9, page 12. The object of the collection undertaken by Abu Bakr was to gather together what had been written in the presence of the Holy Prophet. Zayd's collection was meant to secure the original writings, and this was the great difficulty to which Zayd alluded. A great portion of the Holy Qur'an had been revealed at Mecca, and even the portion that was revealed at Medina was not wholly in the possession of Zayd. Zayd had to search writings made in the presence of the Holy Prophet. He was chosen for the task because he had written the greater portion of the revelation at Medina, and was presumed to have all those copies safe in his custody. But the task before him was a very difficult one. He had to search all the original writings and give them an arrangement in accordance with that of the verses and chapters as followed in the recitation of the entire Qur'an from memory, in obedience to the directions given by the Holy Prophet, that these writings were safe, cannot be doubted. Everything relating to the divine revelation was preserved with utmost care, but the task was no doubt an arduous one, and required hard labor and diligent search. Hence Zayd, with a true appreciation of the difficulties before him, said that it was equivalent to the removing of a mountain of a beggar's orders. There are clear considerations showing that the service which Zayd was entrusted was the collection and arrangement of the original manuscripts of the different verses and chapters made in the presence of the Holy Prophet. The object of Abu Bakr and Umar was not to have a volume of the Holy Qur'an prepared by Zayd, writing out the Holy Book, which recited by the reciters, but to prepare a book by collecting the original writings. This is the reason that the word collection, jama, is always used in connection with this task, not arrangement or compilation. Hence, the first direction of Abu Bakr to Zayd was to search for Al-Quran and collect it, and it is easy to see that a search had only to be made for writings if the object of the new collection, for which Umar contended, were simply to reduce Al-Quran to writing as recited by the Qur'an. Sufficient accuracy could have been obtained by gathering together a few reciters, and Zayd had only to write out Al-Quran as dictated by them and approved by the companions. But Umar's object and Abu Bakr's orders were to gather the original writings, which had been written according to the directions of the Holy Prophet himself, and thus to make the accuracy of the text doubly certain. Zayd made a complete search and collected the original manuscripts. The report further tells us that Zayd followed this course, for after being convinced that Abu Bakr and Umar were right, he thus describes what was done. I then began to search for Al-Quran, and I collected it from palm stems and tablets of stone, and the hearts of men, until I found the concluding verses of the chapter entitled The Immunity in the possession of Abu Khuzaimah Ansari, and that I did not find them in the possession of anyone else. Bukhari, chapter 65, 920. This shows that Zayd had two things to do: to search for the writings and to collect them into a single volume. Now, the collection required an arrangement of verses and chapters, for the writings themselves were found in the possession of different men, and they could give no clue to the arrangement that was to be followed. It was for the sake of arrangement that Zayd had to resort to the reciters, and it is to this that the words hearts of men refer in the report quoted above. In fact, without help of the reciters, the collection of the writings in the form of a complete volume was not possible. It was for this reason that Umar urged that the collection should be commenced whilst a large number of reciters were still alive, and it is for this reason that Zayd mentions that in collecting the writings he had to resort to memory, or the hearts of men, as he puts it. The words do not indicate that he sought for some chapters from writings and for others from memory, for if he could trust memory alone in the case of one part of the revelation, he had no need to search for writings. For the rest, the whole could have been easily written down from the dictation of the reciters. Abu Abu Bakr's collection in writing accorded with the Prophet's collection is preserved in memory. The most important question with regard to the collection made under the orders of Abu Bakr is, did it accord in every respect with Al-Qur'an as stored and collected in the memories of the companions, and as repeated and recited publicly as well as privately in the lifetime of the Holy Prophet? There is not the least reason to believe that it did not. In the first place, none of the compilers was actuated by any motive to make any change in the text. The earnest desire of all those engaged in the task was to have a complete and faithful collection of what would have been revealed to the Holy Prophet, and Zayd had only undertaken the task after full appreciation of the difficulties. Secondly, the collection began only 6 months after the death of the Holy Prophet. While almost all those who had heard Al-Qur'an from his lips were still alive, the Qur'an, as recited by the Holy Prophet, was still fresh in the memories of the companions, and any tampering with the text could have been easily brought to notice. Thirdly, there were many among them who could repeat the whole of Al-Qur'an from memory. There were others who knew large portions, and these were kept fresh in memory by constant recitation in and apart from prayers. It was impossible that any variation from the text as prevalent in the lifetime of the Holy Prophet should have found its way into the collection of the presence of such men. Fourthly, there were many transcripts of the revelation current of such men. Fourthly, there were many transcripts of revelation current among the companions, and since every verse was written at the time of its revelation and copies of it were made by the companions, there were ample means of testing the accuracy of the collection of Zayd. The writings were in the presence of different companions, and so they all had a chance to see for themselves that the collection made by Zayd was a faithful collection of the original writings, or the presence of one man could be compared with those in the presence of another. And thus, in the case of recitation, there was no possibility of any error creeping into text. Memory in writing thus corroborated the already unimpeachable testimony afforded by each. Fifthly, there is no mention at all, in any report whatever, that anything was left out of the collection made under the orders of Abu Bakr, or that anything had been added to it, which was not considered to be part of the divine revelation. And, of course, there's many narrations that point out that the difference between the revelation and inspiration and the Hadith Qudsi were separate from the Quran. So, as Murrah says, we hear of no fragments, sentences, or words omitted by the compilers, nor of any that differed from the received edition. Any would undoubtedly have been preserved and noticed in those traditional repositories which treasured up the minutest and most trivial acts and sayings of the Prophet. There were important things lost in the process, though. 5. Uthman ordered further copies from Abu Bakr's original collection. Circumstance necessitated Uthman's making further copies of Al-Qur'an. As shown above, there are strong and conclusive arguments showing that the collections made under the orders of Abu Bakr agreed in every way, in text as well as in arrangement, with the collection made under the direction of the Holy Prophet himself, and preserved in memory by the reciters. The collection thus made remained, we are told, in the possession of Abu Bakr, and after his death, and that of Umar, after the latter's death, the copy was transferred to the custody of Hafsa, the daughter of Umar, and a widow of the Holy Prophet. Thus the collection, made by the orders of Abu Bakr, came down to the reign of Uthman without any alteration in its text or arrangement, but some circumstances coming to the notice of Uthman he deemed it necessary to circulate official copies, transcribed by official scribes, and suppress all those made by private persons, either from the collection of Zayd or from other writings still prevalent among them. Well, suppressing the copies, that's the question here. Why suppress people having fragments of scripture that they didn't have made by the government? Oh, did he want money? What's his thing? The circumstances which made it necessary are thus. Anas relates that there came to Uthman Hudayfa, who had been fighting with the people of Syria in the conquest of Armenia, and with the people of Iraq in Azerbaijan, and who were alarmed at their variations in the modes of reading. And he said to Uthman, O commander of the faithful, stop the people, for they differ in the holy book, as the Jews and Christians differ in their scriptures. So Uthman sent word to Hafsa, asking her to send him Al-Qur'an in her possession, so that they might make other copies of it, and then send the original copy back to her. Thereupon Hafsa sent the copy to Uthman, and he ordered Zayd ibn Thabit and Abdullah ibn Zubair and Sa'id ibn al-As and Abdullah Rahman ibn Harith ibn Hasham, and they made copies from the original copy. Uthman also said to the three men who belonged to the Quraysh, Zayd only being of Medina, when you differ with Zayd in anything concerning the Al-Qur'an, then write it in the language of the Quraysh, for it is in their language that it was revealed. They obeyed these instructions, and when they had made the required number of copies from the original copy, Uthman returned the original to Hafsa and sent to every quarter one of the copies thus made, and ordered all other copies, or leaves on which Al-Qur'an was written, to be burned. Bukhari 66:3. And it is narrated that Ali and some others refused to burn their copies, and who knows how many just kept it silent that they actually had their manuscripts, because this seems... But the Prophet is narrated in Sunni narrations at the least, and Shia narrations, but I'm not as familiar with that. But I do see how it was narrated there that the Prophet, that the Quran was already in its dialects. Now, some narrations say it had 7, some narrations say it had 10, and then there were the various modes. And particularly since none of these variants conflict with each other, and there's less variants than a single chapter of Genesis, or, an equivalent portion of the New Testament, right? Probably a smaller portion of the New Testament than Genesis, but, well, what they call the New Testament, yeah, because in some dialects you could say a noon instead of a meme, or the other way around, or a sin instead of a sod, or, that sort of thing. But it was the same word. The Caliph was told by one of his generals that there were variations in the modes of reading Al-Qur'an in such distant parts of the kingdom as Syria and Armenia. No such differences are pointed out to have existed at Medina or Mecca or anywhere within Arabia. It is only in newly converted countries, where Arabic was not spoken, that these differences were noticed. So maybe that's not what they were talking about. Maybe they were talking about people can't pronounce things. Like, I've heard people recite the Quran in things that I've memorized, and sometimes it's nowhere near as quick to figure out what they're saying, because they'll say the same letter with this 3 letters with the same sound, or gr, the, and z, maybe even g with the same sound, and there's other examples. It was only in newly converted countries where Arabic was not spoken that these differences were noticed. As to the nature of these differences, it is stated in clear words that they were only differences in the qira'at, or modes of reading, but it was feared that, if nothing was done to put a stop to the slight differences existing at that time, they might, after the lapse of a few generations, develop into serious ones. What the differences exactly were, it is difficult to say, but a reference to earlier anecdotes cast some further light upon their nature. We are told in authentic hadith that different modes of reading certain words were allowed by the Holy Prophet himself, and some companions, unacquainted with the permission, at first severely took to anybody they heard reading any word of the Holy Qur'an in a different method. The reason for this permission was that people belonging to certain tribes could not pronounce certain words in the ordinary way. Well, as we see from, I have different dialects of Qur'an, and they're saying the same words, but there's some differences in how those words are said with the different dialects. These people were allowed to read them in the manner in which they could easily pronounce them. This subject has been more fully discussed further on. Unnecessary variations in the readings were forbidden by Umar before. Now, unnecessary variations, non-existent prior, that's obvious. The permission to read any word in a different method was based on a necessity. Only those could avail themselves of this permission who, on account of their being unaccustomed from their very childhood to pronounce certain words in a certain manner, could not pronounce them in the pure dialect of the Quraysh. But when Islam spread through Arabia, the need to read certain words in a different method disappeared, for the foreigners could pronounce a word in the dialect of the Quraysh with the same facility as in any other dialect. Some people, however, still taught Al-Quran adhering to certain readings which were not in accordance with the pure style of the Quraysh. Well, it wasn't that the Quraysh, that was pure. If it was an authentic, dialect difference with a word, their dialects are, saying that another dialect of Arabic's not pure, or that some of the modes based on the other dialects are even the Quraysh dialect, if it's not one of the common modes. If it's not one of the most popular modes. I don't remember how the different modes of the thing break down, but some of them may even have abused the permission and favored certain readings, although they had no need for them. This evil seems to have spread at Kufa, and it was at this Hudhayfa referred when he was alarmed at the variations in the readings. The conclusion is corroborated with anecdote relating to a period earlier than the time of Uthman. Umar was told that Ibn Masud read Atta bin instead of Hatta bin, both meaning till a time. FB, Volume 9, page 24. Now the dialect of Hudayl and Thaqif, Hatta was pronounced Atta, under Atta. Ibn Masud did not belong to either of these tribes, but he favored a peculiar reading, which had been permitted only because people belonging to a certain tribe could not utter the word otherwise. If they could say everything in the alphabet, I don't think that was the argument. It was that in their dialect, one of the letters in one of the words was pronounced differently. When Umar was told that Ibn Masud taught Atta instead of Hatta, the Caliph wrote to him that Al-Quran was revealed in the language of the Quraysh, and that he should not read it in the dialect of the Hudayl. So teach it to the people in the language of the Quraysh, and not in that of the Hudayl. B. Volume 9, page 24. Uthman only followed Umar's actions. It was to put a stop once and for all to the continuity of such variations that Uthman ordered the burning of all private copies of Al-Quran. The instruction which Uthman gave to the syndicate of the scribes further supports this conclusion. To the members of the committee who belonged to the Quraysh, he gave the direction: when you differ with Zayd in anything concerning the Quran, then write it in the language of the Quraysh, for it is in their language that it was revealed. 61:3. This direction, we are told, was obeyed. Uthman then went no further than Umar. Only the variation of readings became more pronounced in his time, and became the source of much evil, and he took a step which was calculated to wipe out once for all those variations which Umar wanted to put a stop to. The significance of the differences alluded to in this above report is explained by another report, where the words are: when you differ with Zayd in the Arabiyat of Al-Quran. Bukhari 66:2. The word Arabiyat signifies the Arabic language. The word clearly implies that by difference in the report meant the difference in the method of pronouncing a word in different dialects. Zayd did not belong to the tribe of Quraysh, and hence, when there was a difference in the manner of reading or writing a word, the decision of the Quraysh members was to be accepted. The only example of the difference alluded to has been preserved to us in the following anecdote: and they differed on that occasion as to Taboot and Taboo. Taboot and Taboo. Sometimes I miss the marks there. The Quraysh members said that it was Taboot, and Zayd said it was Taboo. The difference was reported to Uthman, and he directed them to write it Taboot, adding that Al-Quran was revealed in the dialect of the Quraysh. Abi, volume 9, page 17. This anecdote shows that the differences were really of a very trivial nature, but even such trivial differences had to be removed. Although we do find that these differences were actually preserved. Other than that, but there's not that many comparatively, and none of them create contradictions or anything like that. So I've looked at differences. Oh, in this passage, here's meanings according to the different readings, and I've seen stuff throughout the Quran for that. And I don't think most chapters. I don't know if most chapters even have a single variation apiece, but the copies made under Uthman's orders were faithful copies of Abu Bakr's collection. The copies transcribed under the orders of Uthman differ from the original collection made by Zayd in the time of Abu Bakr. The report tells us that when variations of readings were brought into the notice of Uthman, the only action he took was to obtain the collection made in the time of Abu Bakr and have other copies transcribed from it for circulation. Thus, copies of Al-Quran described under his orders were true and faithful copies of the collection of Abu Bakr, which, as we have seen, was in the custody of Hafsa after the death of Umar. Zayd was one of the men who were now called upon to make fresh copies from it, to remove any difference of dialect or variations in the mode of writing certain words that might possibly arise. Uthman gave the orders that the reading of the Quraysh should be adopted in preference to any other reading, but the only example of such variation that has been preserved to us in reports is that Zayd read a word as taboo, and the Quraysh read it as taboot, and no other difference was pointed out. There being a very slight difference as to the manner in which the final letter of the word was to be written, without there being the slightest change in significance. Well, a longer U indicates a wow in there, but perhaps we're talking verses with a wow. Well, that's the two letters different, but anyways, yeah. Without there being the slightest change in significance, and such importance was given to the trifling difference that the matter was reported to Uthman for decision. Hence, we have conclusive testimony in our hands showing that the copies of Al-Qur'an made and circulated under the orders of Uthman were exact and faithful copies of the original collection of Zayd made in the time of Abu Bakr. Had there been any difference between the original and the copies made, it would no doubt have come to light in the long reign of Uthman or in that of Ali, when the Muslimin had been divided into factions, and that copy was still in the possession of Hafsa. The men who murdered the aged and venerable Caliph could not have failed to bring to light any difference that might have existed between the copy of Hafsa and the copies made under his orders. But there is nothing on record to show that any such charge was brought against Uthman, even by his murderers. Thus backing up the idea that him being Umar and Uthman being, Uthman in particular being killed was just political. And same thing with Umar. He wasn't killed because, there was some sectarian difference or some claim that he did something to the religion. Uthman's action in burning private copies supported by all. Had the action of Uthman in destroying all private copies of the Holy Qur'an been arbitrary or unjustifiable, the companions of the Holy Prophet would never have yielded to it. They, however, not only approved of his actions, but also willingly carried out his orders. A request had come to him from the distant Syria, and he should take immediate steps to put a stop to variations in readings, and this he could not do except by issuing official copies of the Holy Qur'an as collected by Abu Bakr, and suppressing all private copies, which were perhaps not made with sufficient care and might have contained any variation of reading. Nor did Uthman take this step without consulting the companions. Ali is reported to have said, "Do not say aught of Uthman of what is good, for he did not take the step with regard to the suppression of the private copies of Al-Qur'an, except after consultation with us. He spoke to us, saying, 'What do you think of this reading?' I've been informed that some of them say to others, 'My reading is better than thine.' Thus, I think, may amount to heresy." I'm not sure what word they mean there, but having one's own opinions isn't exactly a cardinal offense in Islam. We asked him what steps he thought advisable to take in this matter. He replied that he thought it necessary to gather people in one reading. To this we all heartily agree. B, Volume 9, page 16. Thus it was only after consultation with the general